thanks first of all, Martin, for joining us in this sort of EdTech leadership sessions that we're doing, and especially this one because it's on safeguarding. So we've done a number of them on sort of things like MIS up to this point. Obviously, a subject I probably know quite well, but it's really, really good to get sort of other people's perceptions on the different elements of EdTech, and especially around safeguarding because it's so important. You know, it's so important to schools out there and to the children. You know, ultimately the children's safety. So it's quite interesting. So I know most people probably know you as the CEO of MyC, which is a safeguarding solution that's out there for schools. But actually, before MyC, so I do know that you are a Chief Constable of Dorset.
That's correct.
Oh, yeah. And so is that where you got your, you know, where you first of all sort of started getting more interested in sort of safeguarding in schools, and did you feel that there was a need there that basically schools had that you don't think was being filled by any other solution?
Yeah, an emerging realisation, I guess, over a very long career is the truth, Nick. Two quick confessions. I am a recovering police officer, and I served in 5 UK police forces, ultimately as Chief Constable of Dorset for 8 years, but I was in the Met for 13 years, predominantly in CID, and actually a lot of that time in counter-terrorism. But also in some interesting places like Stoke Newington and Bermondsey, Peckham and Camberwell, and so on and so forth. So I met a lot of very varied and interesting people. And in fact, one of my early kind of experiences as a detective on the anti-terrorist branch was a bomb that exploded at a car just close to Speaker's Corner one Sunday lunchtime. And it had been made by students attending a college. The nationality is irrelevant, but the point is that they were using college facilities and as a cover for what they were doing. And we intended to explode this device at Speaker's Corner on a Sunday afternoon. So all of a sudden I'm starting to think, you know, this is not conventional terrorism as we know it, if you like. Actually, this was early radicalisation, and we are going back some time now into the 80s.
Yeah.
And after 13 years in the police service, all of which was operational, I'd reached the heady rank of detective sergeant at Stoke Newington, and done lots of interesting things, and decided to actually move to a county force for different experience. And I went back to being uniform Bobby in West Mercia. Which for those of us that know is Hereford, Worcester and Shropshire.
Yeah.
And I went from Stoke Newington to Ludlow, probably about as far apart as you could get culturally and in lots of other ways. And I had to learn all sorts of things about when you're 25 miles away from the nearest help and there's only 2 of you on duty. You know, there's potentially different ways of dealing with situations, as well as all of the things that actually go with rural life, sadly. There was a recession at about that time, and all of a sudden we were dealing with suicides in the farming community. We had a school in Ludlow where the principal, who was a bastion of the local community, of the local church, knew a lot of the local police officers, was actually systematically abusing children going to the school. And these are children with troubled history who are being sent quite often from London boroughs or other parts of the country into these institutions, and actually they're then arriving there to be systematically abused. So I happened to be the custody officer when he was brought into custody, and I've met him a number of times because my wife had actually, as a police officer, been teaching swimming to some of these children. So this kind of dawning realisation comes upon you as a police officer that actually the people that end up in the custody suite, in terms of quite often young people, but also people later in life, actually didn't start off with a great start in life. And if you can have a great start in life, and education is part of that great start in life, having a roof over your head, having a family, somebody that loves you, being able, when you leave school, to sustain yourself, to get a job, to have meaning, to have meaningful relationships. All of that starts from the very beginning of life, and those early years in education really are the pivotal moment. And it's not just about the educational outcomes, but actually, if you look at the life expectancy of people who have been subject to adverse childhood experiences, if you look at their opportunity to get a job, to form relationships, to achieve many things in life, and ultimately the length of their life is governed by the start that they had.
Yeah, sure.
And actually that has a real impact on you when you start looking at somebody across the custody desk through a different set of lenses. So it's always been really important to me to try to remember that everybody is actually in a minority of one, that we all need to be treated as individuals according to our needs.
Yeah.
Yes, if we committed a crime, then the justice system needs to take, its course.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you write people off for forever. And actually, the best thing to do is to stop people getting into the criminal justice system in the first place. Yeah. So the second confession is I'm a school governor of some years, and I'm now a multi-academy trust director. Mm-hmm. So actually, having seen it for the last, getting on for 20 years now, through those lenses as well, you realise that, all of the things that I was seeing at the other end of the telescope, if I can put it that way, actually, when you look at it from the lens of standing in front of a group of youngsters, and I did that often as a police officer going into assemblies and so on and so forth, I never looked across a sea of faces and thought, there's a load of trouble, or crikey, there's a load of risk. All I ever saw was a huge amount of potential and eagerness and enthusiasm and all those things that you get from young people. So actually, for me, having had those two experiences and also having tried to work for many years on a multi-agency basis, because ultimately that's how safeguarding works best, you realise what an uphill struggle it is for practitioners, and how actually you can be helped. If you've tried to do it yourself and you've been through the system, and sadly I have been to inquests and coroner's courts and Crown courts and given evidence in the death of children and vulnerable adults. Mm-hmm. This is serious. Yeah. And it seriously affects people's life chances. The prevalence of alcohol abuse, drug abuse in those people that have had adverse childhood experience is exponentially higher than the general population. So it's of fundamental importance, and it's a fundamental duty on all responsible adults to actually contribute. I've got a background in policing.
More than that as well. My hat goes off to a big star. That's wow. It's interesting actually, because I fully agree. There's my sister worked at a school in Salford, and it wasn't really in most of the cases. Well, in lots of cases, it's not all the cases, but not lots of cases. It's not about performance of what grade they're going to get to. It's more about aspirational. How do you get that aspiration? How do they want to do more? Because they're being told so much that they're not going to achieve. They're never going to be anything. And it's so important sometimes not to just focus on the grade, but focus on, that person and, enabling them to be as best as they possibly can, and take them away from some of the negativity almost, that's around them.
I think that's so true. In the work, then in safeguarding and in education, then extends well beyond the individual to the family, to the people around them. Because ultimately, quite often, those are the people that are holding people back, because they're actually saying, no, you're not going to be able to do that. Don't even try. Yep. Don't bother. Why are you bothering yourself with that? Come over here, we'll go and nick a car and joyride, or whatever it happens to be. but they're leading the path of temptation away from, actually, I think I could have a go at that. And it's actually a common trait between men and women in the career market. You know, women only ever want to do something if they've 74 times qualified to do the job. Broadly speaking, blokes will have a go at anything if they're not qualified to do it. And actually, with youngsters, you want them to be encouraged to feel, yes, I can. Yes, I can. And they can make a fundamental difference, you know, as individuals. You know, whether, you know, you've only got to look at some of the young people, the role models in our society today, and what a fantastic contribution they make to the understanding of the rest of us who haven't thought about it like that, because we're all always being educated, you know, and that, you know, for me is truly inspirational. If you can release that, you know, that pent up potential.
Yeah.
If you can actually release that, you know, the potential to do good is unlimited, as is sometimes the potential to do bad if it's wrongly directed. And that's, you know, fundamental.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you find that, do you think that sometimes there's too much pressure on teachers to focus on some of the social care elements? Or do you think actually, you know, that should be quite fundamental as part of the role, as it should be, as you're saying, to all of us actually who are responsible adults?
Yeah. No, I do think it is a fundamental part of the role because, you know, going back to kind of, you know, simple psychology, Maslow and the hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
You know, if I haven't been fed, if I haven't been washed, if nobody loves me, am I going to sit in the classroom and apply myself to learning? No, I want actually to feel that community around me, people supporting me, people encouraging me, people steering me when I'm going in the wrong direction. But all of those things, we did some leadership development a few years ago when I was in Dorset Police, and we got Chris Akabusi along as part of it. We did lots of interesting things, but he talks passionately about the sergeant. He joined the army, he came from being in care, 16 years old, into the army, and the sergeant just saw the potential in him and gave him his first set of running shoes and started to encourage and train him. And the guy just excelled. And, you know, a totally different path than, you know, a stereotype of somebody in this situation might have been expected to achieve in life. Yeah. And when you hear it from somebody who's actually made that journey and has actually been supported and been mentored, you really do see the phenomenal difference it makes, you know, and so that relationship between a member of staff in a school, whether it's a TA or the teacher, actually having somebody that is there guiding, certainly teaching, but actually enabling learning, creating opportunities, creating a can-do atmosphere. All of that starts with, you know, the school, you know, that I've been involved with for many years, in a relatively well-heeled part of the world compared to some other parts of the world, but are still feeding children, are still washing their clothes, are still making them, you know, sounds cheesy, but making them feel loved. You know, it really is fundamental to me that everybody should have that opportunity.
I totally agree with you. I think, you know, it's inspirational. I find that Chris Akibusi is inspirational as well. I've actually heard one of his talks, and he's amazing. But I won't reflect on the Linford Christie conversation that he had. That's something different.